In March 2024, the University of South Wales Twitter account tweeted, "The Women's History Month event, hosted by our Centre for Gender Studies in Wales, marked 29 years since the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women, which was held in Beijing in 1995, and is recognised as a watershed in mainstreaming gender equality across the globe." It was also at this event that Hillary Clinton made her famous declaration that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights, once and for all.
However different we may appear, there is far more that unites us than divides us. We share a common future, and we are here to find common ground. The great challenge of this conference is to give voice to women everywhere whose experiences go unnoticed, whose words go unheard. I believe that now, on the eve of a new millennium, it is time to break the silence. It is time for us to say here in Beijing, and for the world to hear, that it is no longer acceptable to discuss women's rights as separate from human rights. If there is one message that echoes forth from this conference, let it be that human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights once and for all. That is the work before you. That is the work before all of us who have a vision of the world we want to see for our children and our grandchildren.
Jane Hutt attended the event at the University of South Wales to discuss progress towards achieving gender equality in Wales. The Fourth World Conference on Women was not uncontroversial. The conference was held in September and was preceded by a preparatory committee meeting in New York the previous March. Author Dale O'Leary wrote, "On March 15, 1995, the preparatory committee meeting, or PrepCom, for the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing convened at the UN in New York. The purpose of UN-sponsored conferences is to prepare a platform for action which will serve as a guide for national and international programs and priorities in the area under discussion for the next decade. As is the pattern for these United Nations conferences, the draft had already gone through several revisions, and this meeting was intended to be the last chance for nations to have input before the text was debated at the actual conference scheduled for September in Beijing, China. The delegates from the various nations and representatives of non-government organisations, or NGOs, accredited by the UN to lobby the delegates, were supposed to receive copies of the draft on February the 1st, but the unofficial text was not made available until the middle of February. On February the 27th, less than 3 weeks before the PrepCom was scheduled to begin, those planning to participate received the official 70-page, 246-paragraph text. Almost no one was pleased with the draft text, and various groups began immediately to prepare amendments. The PrepCom for Beijing was confrontational from the beginning. At one point, 2 paragraphs of text had generated 31 pages of amendments. Although the PrepCom was extended 3 days, when it was finally over, more than 1/3 of the text remained bracketed, that is, enclosed in square brackets. Only bracketed text can be debated in Beijing. In addition to the bracketed text, the word gender had been remanded to a contact group for definition. At the end of the PrepCom, Earth Negotiations Bulletin, a newsletter circulated at the United Nations, published a report reviewing the proceedings and offering the following analysis of the debate over gender, which dominated the last few days of the PrepCom. The debate over the word gender reveals some of the fundamental differences and positions of delegations regarding the Beijing objectives. Indeed, the debate could become a textbook case study on the state of global feminism and feminist epistemology. The issue raised central debates over the relation between language, knowledge and power, the political contest over natural and socially negotiated identity, and ideas informing the current backlash against some of the feminist advances made in the United States. Several countries expressed discomfort with the term gender and asked to bracket the word throughout the text. Others felt that this would impede the process and pointed to years of use of the term in the UN and in contemporary academic literature, and the lack of any questioning until this point. Those who wanted to bracket the term suspected that there was a hidden or unacceptable agenda behind its use. The Bureau circulated and retracted a definition of gender as the socially constructed roles adopted by men and women. Some of those who objected to the brackets suggested that the obstruction had serious implications. During one of the floor debates on the term, the delegate from the European Union suggested that those who had asked for brackets might have a greater motive than the one stated, and that perhaps they wanted to bracket women throughout the text. The clash between those who thought the draft platform was taking the role of women too far and those who believed that others were trying to derail the process slowed down negotiations and frustrated their participants. The definitive question should have been aired and addressed earlier in the preparatory process. Some of the most interested parties in the debate are now represented in the contact group set up to arrive at an agreed understanding of the word gender. As one senior US delegate puts it, the likely outcome will be the introduction of some positive fuzziness to the text. It is to be hoped that the exercise will provide an important forum for those with differing conceptions to learn more about each other's approach to the conference and issues at hand. Dale continued, the majority of delegates were looking for practical ways to help women and hadn't come to New York to debate feminist epistemology, feminists' philosophical theories of how we know things. The reason why the term gender had not been challenged earlier in the process was that both sides thought that their understanding of the definition of gender was accepted by the other. The majority of the delegates had assumed that the word gender was simply a polite way of saying sex, to avoid the secondary meaning which sex has in English, and that gender referred to male and female human beings. On the other hand, as the debate progressed, it became obvious that the supporters of the gender perspective believed that their understanding of the meaning of gender as referring to socially constructed roles was understood and accepted. In her book, The Gender Agenda, Redefining Equality, Dale O'Leary continues, when the extended PrepCom ended in April, the draft was still heavily bracketed, and the keyword gender had not been defined. A contact group was scheduled to meet on the 15th of May to discuss the definition. The break gave the gender establishment time to pressure the poor pro-family countries not to accept the pro-family definition of gender as referring to two sexes. The Coalition for Women and the Family tried to influence the delegates to the contact group with flyers and information about the radical feminist agenda, such as the one shown below. Gender. Define it or do not use it. The word gender has become politicized. If it is going to be used in the text, it must be defined so everyone can agree on what is meant. Some radical feminists use gender in contrast to sex. Sex means the biological reality of male and female. Gender means the social conditioning and cultural practices associated with masculinity and femininity. Those who push this definition do so because they believe that all the obvious differences between men and women are not natural, but are caused by oppressive gender socialization, and women will be free only when they are no longer forced by their cultures to be feminine. They further believe that whereas sex is fixed, People can choose their gender. This interpretation is particularly popular among homosexuals and lesbians. This definition declares war on femininity and natural womanhood. The gender perspective is essentially a neo-Marxist interpretation of world history, under which gender, not class or race, is viewed as the fundamental category of repression, because gender transcends all categories. Under the gender perspective, everything is viewed as part of the power struggle between men and women. The gender perspective in this context means a sex-class revolution of women against men. Before the nations of the world give their consent to any platform for action, which includes the word gender, they should demand a clear definition of the term, or replace the term gender with unambiguous language. Pro-family flyers and lobbying proved no match for the behind-the-scenes arm-twisting carried on by the US, European powers, United Nations agencies and other interested parties. An African government official remarked that he had never experienced such pressure. To countries facing severe economic realities, taking a position which would put at risk their relationship with powerful aid donors and those who approve loan applications wasn't an option. At the first meeting, the debate immediately bogged down. The delegates from Honduras, Guatemala, Benin, Malta and the Holy See had all expressed concern about the definition of gender as socially constructed roles. The chairman, Mrs. Salma Ashipala of Namibia, decided to take upon herself the task of writing a definition, which was presented at the next meeting. Her definition read as follows. Having considered the issue thoroughly, the contact group noted that 1. The word gender has been commonly used and understood in its ordinary, generally accepted usage in numerous other UN fora and conferences. 2. There was no indication that any new meaning or connotation of the term, different from accepted prior usage, is intended in the draft platform for action. 3. In the context of the platform for action, the commonly understood meaning of the word gender refers to the socially constructed roles played and expected of men and women in society, as well as the responsibilities and opportunities of men and women arising from these roles. Accordingly, the contact group agreed to reaffirm that the word gender, as used in the platform for action of the Fourth World Conference on Women, is intended to be interpreted and understood as it is in ordinary, generally accepted usage. The contact group also agreed that this report be read by the chair of the conference as a chairperson's statement, and that the statement should form part of the documentation of the final report of the conference. The strange thing about this statement is that it did not reflect facts. The statement claims that the word gender has been commonly used and understood in its ordinary, generally accepted usage in numerous other UN fora and conferences. For the majority of the delegates participating in these conferences, English is not their first language, and therefore they rely on dictionary definitions. Searching a number of dictionaries, one finds that the first and primary definition of gender refers to grammar and describes words. Nouns, pronouns, and adjectives in some languages have a gender, usually masculine, feminine, or neuter. Gender in grammar refers to classes or groups of things. The secondary definition is as an equivalent to sex, meaning masculine or feminine. Socially constructed roles that can change was not listed in any English or foreign language dictionary as a definition. The definition of gender as socially constructed roles that can be changed was not its ordinary, generally accepted usage. The usage might be generally accepted among feminists, but they are hardly ordinary. The second statement. There is no indication that any new meaning or connotation of the term, different from accepted prior usage, is intended in the draft platform for action, also did not reflect the facts. A substantial difference existed between the way gender was used in the Beijing draft and its use at other conferences. There is no evidence that this change in the meaning of gender had been discussed or agreed to by delegates in the General Assembly or in any of the major conferences. The gender establishment had simply pushed it through and were clearly determined to protect what amounted to a coup. The impasse was resolved in a way comprehensible only to those accustomed to the Byzantine world of UN diplomacy. The delegates of the contact group, over the vigorous objections of Senora Wilson, deleted the third section and accepted the rest of the statement. Thus, gender is now defined as it has been commonly used and understood, but no definition is given. Since the contact group was formed because there was no common understanding, this was, to say the least, disingenuous. Within the mission statement of the Platform for Action within the final report, Article 1 states, "The Platform for Action is an agenda for women's empowerment. It aims at accelerating the implementation of the Nairobi forward-looking strategies for the advancement of women and at removing all the obstacles to women's active participation in all spheres of public and private life through a full and equal share in economic, social, cultural and political decision-making." Article 3 states, "The Platform for Action emphasises that women share common concerns that can be addressed only by working together and in partnership with men towards the common goal of gender equality around the world." A footnote is next to the word gender, which states, "For the commonly understood meaning of the word gender, see Annex 4 to the present report." Annex 4 provides no definition of the word gender other than as it has been commonly used and understood. The report references the word gender 272 times. If the word gender is used as both a synonym for sex, a biological definition, and a reference to the social expectations of the roles and behaviours of a particular sex, a sociological definition, then the meaning of the word can usually be derived from the context. But that would subsequently change. Within the Platform for Action, strategic objective B4 is to develop non-discriminatory education and training. The actions to be taken: G. Support and develop gender studies and research at all levels of education, especially at the postgraduate level of academic institutions, and apply them in the development of curricula, including university curricula, textbooks and teaching aids, and in teacher training. In December 2017, the Future of the Sex and Relationships Education Curriculum in Wales was published. In the glossary of the document, there is a definition of gender that includes this sentence: "While the concept gender can include the different ways societies assign chromosomes or body parts to sex categories, it is not synonymous with sex and does not only refer to gender identity or gender expression." Following the work of the Sex and Relationships Education Expert Panel, the word gender is no longer to be regarded as synonymous with sex in the teaching of children. This is the culmination of the feminist strategy to replace sex by gender in law, education and public policies and procedures. Within the Platform for Action, strategic objective G1 is to take measures to ensure women's equal access to and full participation in power structures and decision-making. The actions to be taken by governments: A. Commit themselves to establishing the goal of gender balance in governmental bodies and committees, as well as in public administrative entities and in the judiciary, including, inter alia, setting specific targets and implementing measures to substantially increase the number of women with a view to achieving equal representation of women and men, if necessary through positive action, in all governmental and public administration positions. This is something that Jane Hutt is committed to implementing. Although, as the word gender is no longer a synonym for sex, she cannot define what a woman is.
Quotas, that's what we should be focusing on today.
I think the reason that there haven't been more legal challenges in other countries, though, Minister, with respect, is because they've defined what a woman is. It's a biological issue. It's not an issue which is defined by an individual presenting themselves and being able to present themselves with a gender that they have chosen. It's a biological issue, therefore it's not going to pose a problem because it's easy to interpret. The term woman on the face of this bill isn't defined. You're unable to give us a definition this morning. I've asked you a few times what the Welsh Government's definition of a woman is in order to help us to scrutinise the bill, and that I don't think is particularly helpful.
Well,
we need to move. We need to move on.
No, well, I still like to know. We have time, Chair. I'd like to know why there's a reluctance. That's all.
Would anyone else like to contribute?
Why is there a reluctance
in terms of development of this legislation?
There is no reluctance in the sense the Minister has given her answer.
On the 24th of April 2024, Conservative Darren Millar tabled a motion for debate in the Senedd to propose that the Senedd notes the CAS review commissioned by NHS England to make recommendations on how to improve NHS gender identity services, which highlighted that there should be extreme caution in prescribing puberty blockers and hormones to under 18s due to a lack of high-quality research into their long-term effects. Number 2, welcomes the fact that due to NHS England stopping puberty blockers, this has resulted in there being no pathway for under 18s in Wales to receive puberty blockers. 3, calls on the Welsh Government to A, adopt the recommendations of the CAS review, and B, ensure that children and their parents are supported with common sense, fact-based guidance. Jane Hutt tabled an amendment, delete all and replace with, to propose that the Senedd notes the publication of the CAS review. 2, notes that NHS Wales commissions gender identity services for children and young people 17 and under from NHS England. 3, notes that NHS England has concluded there is not enough evidence to support the safety or clinical effectiveness of puberty-suppressing hormones for the treatment of gender dysphoria in children and young people at this time. 4, notes that the Welsh Government will continue to develop the transgender guidance for schools, taking account of the CAS review and stakeholder views. The Labour amendment passed. The Welsh Government are evidently still balancing the benefits of continuing to push this feminist ideology against the evident psychological impact on vulnerable young people in Wales.